So, topic tonight is HOD, the Midah of HOD. And the Midah of HOD is an often understood Midah, an often understood attribute. And so we'll get into it tonight, or today, wherever you are, as we speak a little bit about what it really means. And let's understand, let's start with the definition, right? What do we mean literally by HOD? HOD means, for example, lehodot is to thank. The midah of HOD means to be, is to agree, is to be thankful. That's on the one hand. Really though, if you look at it in context, what we're talking about is the aspect of submissiveness, right? Last week we spoke about the concept of netzach. Netzach was about dominance. Netzach was about being assertive, eternal, victorious, overcoming. That was the concept of netzach, right? On the flip side of that, you have the aspect of HOD, which means to be submissive, which means to be accepting, which means to be passive, not in a way of not caring, but in a way of letting things go. And this is also important. Now, people might take this in an inappropriate way and say, all right, listen, the assertive guy, he is, putting himself forward, and the other one's kind of being wimpy, right? And that could be if HOD is being used in an inappropriate way. But like we've mentioned before, all of these midot, all of these attributes, all of these concepts we're speaking about here are referred to in the earlier texts as not just as Sefirot, but as midot. Midot means measurements. Each one of these are holy midot, are holy attributes. And the question just becomes, can we assert them in the proper way at the proper time, right? All of them can be taken to an unhealthy extreme, right? We can, if we're always holding by the midah, by the attribute of netzach, of assertiveness, so then we become overly aggressive, we become pushy, we become abusive. And that, of course, that's no good. And so same thing, of course, yes, it's true, if a person's always holding by HOD, then a person is, again, going to be usually coming from a place of insecurity. It does become a little bit of what's called a nebuch, a pity case. It becomes a pushover. And a lot of people, there are people who are out there who will try to make their insecurities and their dysfunction into something holy. But of course, that's not holy. There's a time to be assertive. There's a time to recognize the reality of who you are and where you're at and where you're up to in life and what you need. And so if we're always holding, so that's an important thing to recognize. A lot of times within Judaism, as people are growing in Judaism, we have to make sure that we're not taking our own insecurities and reading them into Judaism, taking our own problems and our own emotional lack of intelligence or fear of confrontation, whatever it might be, and somehow turn it into this holy thing, right? Our lack of fitness and bring it and try to turn it into some holy thing. Oh, well, everyone, the secular society talks about the physicality of things and whatever. No. It should be more than just physical. Yeah, okay, it should be more than just physical, but okay, we need to also be responsibly physically as well, right? So all of these things can be taken in unhealthy extremes that become destructive and not holy. And so the idea is to achieve a balance here. The idea is, when do I access netzach in a holy way? When do I access HOD in a holy way? And so Aaron HaKohen, Aaron is known to be, he is the prime example, the personification of what it meant to be and what it means to be acting in a holy way with this concept of HOD. Meaning to say that we understand him to be the peacemaker and even to be a peace chaser. It's well known that he would go, if he heard that there was arguments going on in the camp of Israel, so he would go speak to one and get him on board with making peace, and then he would go speak to the other guy and tell him, this other guy, he's willing to make, he would talk about how each one of them really want to make peace, and bring them together, also within spouses as well. Okay, and so this is an important thing we have to understand about Jewish unity, that we need to have a healthy dose of HOD, a healthy dose of being able to take a step back to open up the space for the other in order to bring Jewish unity, right? Jewish unity doesn't mean that someday when we have Jewish unity, everyone's going to be the same. No, that's not what Jewish unity means. Jewish unity means is that there are differences. There are different nusachot. There are different tribes within Israel. There are the 12 tribes of Israel. And that comes along with different dialects, different emphasis on different emphasizing things in different ways. And the point is, what unity is going to be based in is understanding strongly who I am, but also making space for that other person and lending validity also to the other person's emphases as well. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that anyone with a Hebrew school education and a bar mitzvah can come along and start reinterpreting Judaism, and we're going to call it an authentic approach to Judaism, right? There are limits to this. Again, you can't go over the top with this, or else that becomes not healthy also. We have there's certain basics, right? There's certain ideas. There's a God. He gave the Torah to the Jewish people. The oral Torah is legit and relevant, right? There are certain basics. But within there, we've always had different emphasis or certain opinions, different ways of looking at it, things. They're right, machloket, right? Machloket means that yes, there's a division on the one hand, but the bigger picture is, like that Rizal says, the word machloket breaks down to if you take those letters, they can be rearranged to spell the mate chelik, the portion dies out. We need to say, when you have the holistic concept of Torah and you understand how to validate each position in the right way, they don't become things that are separate pieces that are divided against one another, but they become aspects of one greater whole. That meaning the parts die out. Seeing them as two separate things, seeing them as two separate portions dies out. Then there's a holistic concept wherein each aspect is a valid piece of a grander puzzle called Judaism. And of course, that means to say that I can see something in a very strong way and have an aspect of the truth and recognize that someone who has a different approach, even though they have a different approach, right? There's an aspect of truth there too. And even though I resonate with the approach that I've aligned with, they also resonate with the approach that they've aligned with, and it's within the context of kosher Torah Judaism. So that means that entails you giving validation, being able to open a space for the existence of that other and the authenticity of that other, right? And this is something also, like right now we're in the time of Sefirat HaOmer, where we know that there was an issue with the students of Rabbi Akiva that it says that they didn't give kavod zelazeh. They didn't give that proper dignity, that proper respect, whatever that means, to the people on their level. That they didn't properly value the approach of the other, right? And so that this is what we're working on right now, is this midah, is this attribute of HOD, right? Which is, again, being able to make that space, be able to be submissive, or to a certain extent to open up the space for the validity of the other. And the way this plays out in life often is when it comes to things going on in life around us, with the people around us, with the circumstances and situations we find ourselves in that we're not so happy about, right? Someone does something that we're not so excited about. Someone who's connected to us maybe, right? Of course, this goes on in all relationships, right? Where the person isn't doing exactly what I want them to do. Or the cards that I have been dealt aren't exactly what I expected. When 20 years earlier, 10 years earlier, I expected something else. I felt like I was on a certain trajectory, and now it turns out that I'm not in that space, right? I'm not there. And so how do I handle that, right? And so what HOD is, the midah of HOD, if we want to define it in a certain way, it means to take the disharmonies in our life, and to be able to hold them, to be able to contain them, to be able to contain disharmony, right? And the truth is, this is how growth happens. This is how resilience is built and perseverance happens within ourselves, is by containing that disharmony, right? Let's look at it in a couple of ways, right? One way simply is physically, right? How does growth happen physically? Is when we have something that's uncomfortable and we're able to manage it and grow with it, right? Weightlifting is a great example, okay? This uncomfortable, but I'm able to tolerate and push through it, even though it's something that's uncomfortable, right? Again, relationships we mentioned. Germs Or another good example, if a person is never exposed to germs and then all of a sudden they're exposed to germs, they're probably going to get sick. But if a person is exposed to them slowly but surely, so the body can contain up to a certain point, the body can, so to speak, a healthy body can contain it and then build strength and resilience to those germs, right? So let me ask you, in life, who has the biggest issue, the biggest problem containing disharmony? I'll tell you who. The so-called idealist. The so-called idealist, right? The idealist, the person who's on high, the person who knows this is what we should do in the world. Why doesn't everyone see that this is how it's supposed to be, right? Isn't it obvious? Like, we all know those whales, they're dying, you know? So the idealist is the one who cannot contain this heart. Now, hold on a second. I thought idealist is a good thing. Well, the thing is, idealist is a good thing. The problem is, a lot of us have been living a life of idealism, or calling it idealism, thinking we're idealists, when really we're actually something else that kind of seems the same. And that's called perfectionists. There's a difference. Perfectionist doesn't mean everything has to be perfect for me to be happy. That's not what I mean. Perfectionist means that everything has to be the way that I think it should be, and isn't it obvious? And then if not, then I can't handle it. Then I can't tolerate it. Then I lose my stuff when I cannot, when things are just not the way they should be. They're not the way they ought to be. And so I cannot handle that reality. Right. And by the way, a lot of us think, even perfectionists, right? A lot of us perfectionists, we think that, like, hold on, yeah, I'm a perfectionist. Yeah, I want things to be the right way. We think that it's a good thing, right? However, that perfectionism leads to a lot of misery in our lives and the people around us. And so what is an idealist really? An idealist really is someone who has certain ideals and certain visions and wants all sorts of great things, but then steps into the reality that is and says, okay, how can I elevate this space? Because this is the reality that is, right? How can we grow from here? That's very different than me having a picture of the way things should be and then trying to impose my picture onto the world, impose my picture onto that person, impose my picture onto that relationship, right? And then when that person doesn't match my picture, I'm going to lose my mind, or I'm going to, you know, commit a violent act onto that person, right? And so it's a tough one. But HOD means to be able to contain this disharmony, that, yeah, that's how the person is. And no, they're not out to get you. Usually they're not out to get you, right? If someone's purposely out to get you, that's another story. But typically, they're not out to get you. Typically, that's just the reality of where they're at, and it has nothing to do with you, right? That's just where it's at. Even when people act nasty to you a lot of times, it's just a reaction to where they're at. It has nothing to do with you, right? And you could be like, well, they should be better, and they should be, yeah, maybe. But this has nothing to do with you. Really, this is about where they're at, right? So like when you walk up to the person in the government office and they're rude to you, do you really think that has something to do with you? No, that has to do with the fact that they've been working this crappy dead-end job where they're treated like garbage for the last 30 years, and they don't feel like they have any prospects to do anything else. And they just got into an argument with their husband that morning before they left to work, right? So it's got nothing to do with you. You're the one who they're able to unload on because they're not afraid of you, and they don't care what you think, right? So if we can recognize that, and recognize that people will be people, right? We do this with our parents as well, right? We do this with parents as well. Parents should have been this, they should have been that. And we have these grand expectations and we hold them to this high standard because we think that they should be all this high level of refinement. And whether they quote unquote should be or shouldn't be, the reality is they are where they are, right? Then you grow up, you get a little bit older and you realize, oh, my parents were just imperfect people trying to do their best, maybe not, but They were where they were. That's it. They're just people, imperfect like everyone else, struggling with everything else. Most adults are just children who got older. Ever think about that one? That's all it is. Right? You grow up when you're younger, you think like, oh, you look at these politicians, the senators, and the president, like they must know something. They must have achieved something. They must be holding at this high level of, you know. And then you get to a certain age and you realize it's the same idiots that I was surrounded with when I was younger. They just got older. So what does that mean to say? It means to say like people will be people. They just are where they're at. That's it. And it's got nothing to do with you. And so then the question becomes, okay, how can I just step in and accept the reality that is for what it is, accept that person for where they're at, accept where that relationship for where it's at, and say, okay, what is the best thing for me to do in this situation, in this reality, in this space, in this relationship as it is, with this person as they are, right? And not to be like, oh, okay, they treated me like crap, so I'm going to be treating them like crap too. No. Be who you're going to be. Contain the reality of where they're at, and don't give up your autonomy and how you want to be based on how they're acting towards you. That's not what we want. That's not being a refined individual and a dignified person and living with integrity. That's turning in your autonomy to live in accordance with how they treat you. No. What we want to do is go ahead and contain the reality of where they're at, contain the disharmony, and as annoying as it is, and then say, okay, how do I want to be in this situation? Who do I want to be? Right? What kind of person did I want to be before they treated me in this way? And it's not about them. That means it's not about them. Just like the truth is that the way they're treating you probably really has very little to do with you, right? Again, they're reacting to stimuli. They're not holding in a high, refined, conscious place. And so they're just reacting to stimuli, right? I walk into that government office, the person starts yelling at me. It could be, again, it has to do with all those things I mentioned before. It could be that someone previous to me walked in 3 days earlier, and the dude also had a beard and was having a bad day also, and he acted crappy to them. And so now this person's acting garbage to me 3 days later. Like, who knows what's going on in people's subconscious? You don't know, right? And the question becomes, okay, who do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? I don't care. Okay, how the person's treating me, whatever it is what it is, right? And sorry, so we had a question here. Hold on, I got to pull up the question. I have to pull up the chats here. How do you feel about this idea? Remove the complaint and there's no problem. I mean, your personal. Oh, whoops, that was private. Sorry. So whoever it was that sent it to me, I do not understand what you're saying. I'm sorry. I guess send it to me in a clear way, or I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself. You're welcome to jump in if you can. All right, so let me, so like, this means then that, and by the way, let's just be clear, we also victimize ourselves, right? We also victimize ourselves. There's a part of us that, like what happens when you're going to be late to something, but you can't leave because there's some dishes in the sink that need to be cleaned, right? So now you cause yourself to be late, not to mention the people around you, not to mention if guests are waiting, right? You can add it to the whole list, right? You'll cause your own downfall because of cleaning. You need to clean dishes. You know what I mean? So because of your again, that's perfectionism right there, right? That because of that, you will victimize yourself, right? So that's when you need to go ahead and bring in a little bit of midat HOD, acceptance, contain the disharmony. Yes, there's dishes in the sink. Contain that, move forward. You hear that idea? I know it's a wild one, right? So when you are victimizing yourself or other people, that means you gotta take a step back and say, okay, how can I contain the disharmony that I'm seeing in front of my face? There's those dishes in the sink. There's that person who's not doing what I want them to do or what I think they, quote unquote, should do, right? So if I'm relinquishing my own self-determination, or if I'm trying to take away someone else's self-determination, it's time to access that midah, that attribute of HOD. Right? Another way we lose our own self-determination is when we're so concerned what other people think. Right? Then we turn in, we stop living the life or making the choices that we want to make in exchange for doing what the other person is expecting us to do. There also, we need to access the aspect of HOD by way of simply opening up ourselves and containing the disharmony of the fact that the other person doesn't approve of the decision that we're making. That's right, let them not approve. That's their choice, what they feel like. That's fine. Don't try to change them, don't try to convince them, don't justify yourself. Allow it to be. Simply be in that moment, in that space of disharmony. Yes, the person doesn't want me to do X, Y, or Z, but this has to do with my choice in my life. I'm gonna go ahead and make that choice and allow it to be. They're gonna be not happy or disapproving of it. But I'm gonna allow it to be, right? And this is what we have to recognize, as if we find ourselves jumping through hula hoops in order to make people happy, in order to not upset people, right? If you feel like, and stop running around like a dog with its tongue hanging out, trying to get the approval of others, whether they be friends, roommates, parents, right? And so how do we do this? How do we become a person that contains disharmony? Answer very simply, little by little, right? That person with the dishes who can't leave the dishes, right? Person can't go to sleep because there are dishes in the sink. So what do? You start little by little. You take one fork, put it right there in the sink, or put it right there even on the floor. Gasp. That's right. Leave it right there on the floor and go to bed. Right? Do a little meditation if you need to. But the fork is there. But the fork is there. Yes, the fork is there. And it will be there in the morning for you to clean. So, little by little, right? I believe they call this exposure therapy. I hope I'm not confusing two ideas, right? And so, right, another way is, again, physically, let's say, like delay eating, for example, delay gratitude, delayed gratification, right? Delay eating or leave a bit of the food over when you're done. That's a way to take a certain mastery, at least a little bit of consciousness and control over yourself, or contain that disharmony of like, I wanted to eat every last bite. You know what? I'm going to leave over. I'm going to leave over the last bite. Right? And not just the end of the crust, which was like the worst part of the pizza, unless you think of the crust as the best part of the pizza, right? No, you find yourself a good piece and you leave that a good piece over, right? Or you're going to delay eating, right? You have it in front of you, you sit there, and despite the fact that it's in front of you, despite the fact that you're hungry a little bit, despite the fact that you smell and the smoke is going off it and everything, you're going to wait 10 minutes or whatever it might be. If that's too much, start with 2 minutes. But with this, you expand yourself as a person. You build resilience and inner strength. You're able to contain disharmony, right? And so essentially, there are two good forms of disharmony, right? One is what I mentioned to you before, this aspect of delayed satisfaction. Another one is about being in the process, being in limbo, right? Imagine, God forbid, a person has to take certain tests at the doctor's office. They're not sure. They might have some kind of illness, God forbid, a serious illness. And so they take the test and then they're waiting 5 days for the test results, right? We know people who is like by day 3, they're just like, I just need to know the results. Even if it's bad news, I rather, right? People will say that they rather have the bad news rather than have to wait and not know. Right? So to be able to hang out in that what do you call that? In limbo, right? And be able to contain the not knowing. And this goes for any kind of process a person is in. I'll give you another example. I think I might have told this story before, that there was this gal that I set up one time. And after the date, she calls me after the date, a couple hours after the date, and tells me that it was good and she wants to go out again. And did the guy call me? I said, no, your date ended like, an hour ago, whatever it was. No, he didn't call me. I figured I'll be in touch, tomorrow. And she's like, all right, well, can you call him up and find out, because I don't want to go to sleep not knowing. Right? So that's when we had to do a whole therapy session of what it means, vulnerability, and staying in the process and stepping into that not knowing and being in that space. There you go. Okay, good. I don't know if it was just last year. So what does that mean? That means that to be able to be in that vulnerable place, and God willing, in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about vulnerability. We're going to have a whole talk on it when we talk about the 7th midah, the 7th trait of Sefirat of the HaOmer, Malchut. We're going to talk about it. But and talk about and people really misunderstand vulnerability. They take it for weakness, but we're going to talk about how no, it's the biggest strength to be able to step forward in that way. But we're going to talk about that, God willing, in a couple of weeks. For now, though, this is the idea, to be able to be in that process and to accept the fact that you're in the process and you don't know where that process is going to lead, right? There's the ego side of ourselves, the lower side of ourselves, the weaker side of ourselves is the one that just wants to end the not knowing, to end the question mark, to end the process, right? The stronger part of ourself and the part of ourself that's going to grow is to be in the process, to know there's growth going on here, right? Don't just try to get it over with. Don't just try to get it over with, right? To be able to step in, and we can do even a little meditation. I don't know, I'll give you a 1 minute little meditation here, right? To welcome disharmony. Think about something that's going on in your life that you don't know where it's going to go, or think about a situation or a person or whatever that they do certain things, or something isn't the way it should be, or isn't the way it could be, or isn't the way you'd like it to be. A person who's not being the way you'd like them to be. And to feel that and feel the feeling in your body of what that feels like when they're not doing what they're quote unquote supposed to be doing. And feel yourself expanding to contain that reality, to contain that situation, to contain that person being the way they're being. And this is something that we can go to. That's an exercise. You can take a couple of minutes to meditate on that. Anytime. It would be a good exercise to do a couple of times a day as we grow in this way. And so as we transition from running away from disharmony and avoiding it at all costs, avoiding that uncomfortable conversation, avoiding that uncomfortable conversation at work, avoiding that uncomfortable conversation in a relationship, as we transition from that to expanding ourselves, to be able to move towards those conversations and have what a rabbi of mine calls courageous conversation, being authentic and real and stepping forward and towards a person and being open and honest without, of course, without attacking the other person, but speaking about what you need to speak about. We turn towards that disharmony, whatever the disharmony is, whether it be those conversations, whether it be what that other person is doing or how they're acting or whatever the situation might be. As we turn towards the disharmony, we realize, I can handle it. I can handle it. It's going to be okay. You're not going to die. It's not the end of the world. It becomes something goes from being something that's overwhelming to something that's annoying. There's a difference. Overwhelming, it's beyond me. I can't handle it. And I avoid it at all costs. Annoying is, okay, it's an aspect that's going on in my life, but my life continues, and I contain that annoying situation, annoying thing. Right? So how do we do this? How do we grow in this way? Is to take on, like we said before, little by little, and it's essentially disharmony by choice. Right? That leads to strength, that leads to resilience. Imagine you put a child doesn't want to go down a big slide in a park, you know? So instead, what do? You take the child, you put it like halfway up, you hold it by its hand, you go, wee, and take it down. It's a little scared, but it'll do it with you know what I mean? And then next time you go a little bit higher, and then eventually he's going down by himself, right? Little by little. Now, what would be the difference? What would be, imagine be like, you take the kid and he wouldn't want to go on there and you just put him all the way in the top and you just push him all down, right? Push him all the way, you push him down, he goes all the way down against his will, right? That's how trauma gets created, right? So forced disharmony leads to trauma, right? A story like back in my day, the way we taught kids how to swim was we just took them and we threw them in, and you know what? They learned, right? Okay. And there's a time for that. Listen, there's times where that's needed. Like, you know, your kid doesn't want to get the shots. You got to give them the shots, you know? It is what it is. Life will have its traumas, but we can also not perpetrate those traumas where they're not needed, right? And so there's an aspect of when it's by choice, okay? When it's by choice. And this holds true for our relationships, not only with our kids, but also for our relationships in terms of the people that we're closest with, et cetera, right? And so the perfectionist wants to resist life's disharmony, right? That ego wants comfort, doesn't want to deal with this stuff, you know? The soul, however, wants growth, wants personal expansion. And the holy way to be is to be able to step into the moment, to step into the situation and not be at war with the situation, not be at war with reality. No, it really shouldn't be this, and therefore I'm out, right? That's the perfectionist mentality. That's the black and white perfectionist mentality. And that's going to lead you to a lot of sadness and depression because you're just not able to deal with reality and with other people, right? And that's why this is so important in relationships, is to be able to get this down. And this requires inner growth, right? And so as we move towards this, we begin to accept again that people are where they're at. And the question becomes, what does God want me to do in the reality that I'm in the situation right now? And if you can make it a God thing, or you can also make it a you thing. What can I do? What is the ideal thing for me to do right now within the given situation, right? Because if you want to get religious about it, God's creating this moment as it is, with all its condition, with its past choices, with its past quote unquote mistakes, if you want to call them mistakes, right? But this situation, we know that Hashem, God is HaMechadesh B'tuvo B'chol Yom Tamid Ma'aseh Bereshit. God is creating. If we mean by God is infinite, then there's no such thing as time for God. So that means God's creating this moment with His entire reality exactly the way it is right now, and putting you in this situation with the free choice and the capacities that you have. Okay, what do you do in this moment? Instead of being at war in the past, instead of being worried about how someone's going to be thinking about you in the future, what are you going to do in this moment? Right? Contain the reality of the moment. Accept the moment for what it is. Don't try to attribute blame or responsibility for the moment. The moment is what it is. Now, contain that and say, okay, what am I going to do from here? That's all we have. What am I going to do from here? So, questions, thoughts, ideas, my friends. What say you? Okay, a hush comes over the crowd. All right, my friends, I hope this is helpful. I hope this is meaningful. So I'll be blessed to be able to expand ourselves, to be what we need to be for ourselves, of course, and also for the people around us. My friends, have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day and week. Thank you for joining.